to the Faith is Not Blind podcast. I'm Sarah Devonier, and I'm here with Natalie.
Hi.
And I have known Natalie for years and have loved her for years, and I'm excited to have her talk about her life and her perspective on her faith. Will you please talk about your childhood a little bit and what comes to mind when you think about your testimony and your home?
Well, I was a child who was very concerned with doing all of the right things. I was really good at making grown-ups happy. I was good at figuring out what thing I needed to do to get praise or be appreciated in different ways, and that was very important to me. And so,
can you just talk about, just to give a little context for people who don't know, how many kids were in your family and what
so
number you were?
I'm one of 8 kids, and I'm the 5th of 8. So I like to say I'm the beginning of the end.
Right.
I was the oldest of the second half, the youngest of the older half,
so
the middle
right
in all
middle.
ways.
But you
all
liked
of it.
to do, as a very typical middle child, you were saying you liked to do what would make the grown-ups happy.
Yeah, I liked to keep the peace. I liked to be praised. And a lot of my motivation came from what's going to make people happy if I do it.
So how did that come into play with your testimony and with church life?
Well, I looked at church as this, really, like we talk about, kind of that laundry list. Like, I can do these things and I'm a good person.
Yes.
Perfect. Like,
so
I
it
can
was
check
an equation.
it off.
Yeah.
Definitely an equation. You plug this in and this is what comes out, and I can handle that, you know?
Yeah, and I'll get the blessings, right? Yeah.
And a lot of people assumed through high school and stuff that my parents were really strict.
Because you were so good.
Because I was very strict myself. And that wasn't the case. They had high expectations for us, and we were, in some ways, I feel like, held to a different level of accountability than some of my friends maybe were, or other things. But they weren't strict, and they were constantly trying to get me to go easier on myself even. And I did this
So
thing.
you're saying this expectation didn't necessarily come from the church or from your parents. It came from you. It was an internal expectation.
It was me, and I think it was more so than any person. It was just like this, the environment, like the surrounding culture of everything showed me that if I did the right things, I had value.
Yeah.
And that's how I would have value.
So as you were trying to do these right things, do you feel like a testimony developed, or was it mostly just a testimony of doing the right things?
I feel like it was a little bit of both. And I've always, I feel like, been blessed to have a good relationship with God and with Jesus. We're tight. I love that guy.
Yeah.
But it's, remind me the question.
Yeah, so how did that, it's interesting because you talked about wanting to do what's right and how your testimony developed because of that. Well, and you sort of answered the question saying, despite that, I still developed a relationship with God. So I'm going to transition to a different question. How did you develop that relationship? Despite the fact that you were just trying to be good, you got to know God and to know Jesus. How would you say that developed?
And I do think that a lot of the closeness and the more intimacy in that relationship that I have now came later on in life.
Right, okay. So describe that.
As I did start to kind of have my worldview shift a little bit, later on in my life. As a child, I had beautiful spiritual experiences that I could never deny, experiences with the priesthood, or experiences just feeling things that were important to me then and are important to me now. But I don't think at that time that I really knew what it was like to have a direct relationship with God.
So what happened to elicit that? What happened to cause a sort of, you said, a paradigm shift?
Yeah. So when I had been married for about 2 years, I was expecting, had I been married for 2 years when I was expecting my second child. Yes, yes, that's true.
Sometimes that's how it happens. Yeah.
But I found out that my husband, who was partially known to me, partially unbeknownst to me, was going through some really deep depression, some really deep struggles with shame and self-loathing. And the way that he was trying to cope was through some things that were just incredibly damaging to the trust in our marriage. And it began a many years long journey of trying to figure out what was going on, because I had done everything right the whole time. I was married in the temple, I was having children, I was going to the temple on a regular basis, I was doing all of the things, and here my life was falling apart. In my eyes, it was what is this?
Like you talked about before with that equation. I had done everything on one side of the equation, and the obvious other side was I'm supposed to be blessed, I'm supposed to be happy.
You have this eternal family, and it's perfect, and it's good. And so right away, in the very first few steps of this, really through the mud, the depths and the darkness of this experience in our relationship, I had an experience very early on, and I saw very clearly my husband and the behaviors that he was participating in, and I saw that they were not him. And I saw very clearly that they were, this was how it was an illness. He was trying so desperately to cope. This was the only way he was trying to figure out how to do so. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does.
And I saw it very clearly. And I thought, okay, I know that this isn't that he's some other person that I didn't know. I'm going to hang on. But that didn't feel like the right answer, because in my mind, when you find out someone is involved in a certain behavior, you run, you get out of there, you dump that person, like, again, with my equations.
Right.
That was my knee-jerk response, was, isn't this what I'm supposed to do? And it wasn't. I was given this huge influx of love and this perspective, this 1,000 feet perspective.
Wow. So things were no longer in sort of, you always wanted to be the good girl, not the bad girl, and then you realized maybe things just aren't measured in terms of good or bad.
Right,
with
because
people.
here was my husband who was involved in some stuff that was, without a doubt, bad behavior. It was tough stuff that we were dealing with, and yet I knew him, and I knew that he was a good person. And that alone was my first paradigm shift. Wait a minute. Good people can do bad things?
Yeah.
Wait, can that be true?
Yeah.
But here I was.
So what do you think enabled you to have that perspective, to realize, like you said when you even described it a few minutes ago, this was a result of shame. He was acting on. So what helped you have that perspective? Because that's a pretty mature perspective to someone who is so young.
And the first step of it was, this is not him. And the way that very first night, and it was almost like a vision. And I saw him, and I saw an overlay, like a light gel, that was this something else that was over him. And that's as much as I had at that point. And the layers of the shame and the depression and all of those things are things that over the years I slowly learned and sorted out, because this wasn't a one-time situation.
Right, because it rarely is. It's a process.
It was 5, 6, I don't even know how many years of ebbs and flows and thinking we're good and relapses, and eventually he was excommunicated. And that, at the very beginning, when things sort of started to fall apart, I would say, well, and that first night he said, I don't even know if I have a testimony anymore. And it was like a sock in the gut. And I was like, that's the worst thing I can imagine. This was a fear that, taught or not, in the pervasive culture was, this is the worst thing that can happen.
Oh, interesting.
And
And so that was in the bad category again. If someone
there's
doesn't
no
have a
hope.
testimony, right?
There's no hope here.
Which, yeah.
And I would say, even if they excommunicate you, you can get rebaptized and everything will be fine. And I kept trying to figure out the end from the beginning and saying, no, we'll put this in a box still, because I like my boxes, and it will be fine.
Right.
And I had to get out of that box. And the first shift was right after he was excommunicated. It was a very difficult disciplinary council. It was not a beautiful council of love like you hear about. It was one of the most difficult, and I'll even say traumatizing, events of both of our lives. And even then, I could see that the men in the room were acting from their own pain, their own fears, their own biases. And
that's extraordinary that you could see that, rather than that.
And it's a gift, and I felt it.
Do you feel like that's
yes.
a spiritual gift connected with the
yes,
Spirit?
I do. My patriarchal blessing says I have the gift of discernment. It doesn't say a ton else, but I've latched onto that one, and I think that's what that means.
Right. So how did that, I mean, this gift of being able to see people, Moroni 7:48 talks about seeing Christ as he really is. Well, you're seeing people as they really are through the Spirit. How did that help you to get through those moments after that disciplinary council?
It helped me at least to process. I still had a lot of anger. We both had a lot of anger toward the situation for a very long time.
Right.
And all of that. But I've learned more than anything that there isn't, there's no bad behavior, there's just pain.
Oh.
All there is people that are hurting and showing it in different ways. And I try to, even now with my kids, we talk about that. Like, people aren't good or bad. People are just feeling different things and acting out or processing through what they feel in different ways. And sometimes those ways hurt other people. And that's really sad. It's really unfortunate. But nobody is bad.
Yeah. So how were you able to not let anger take you away from your testimony, away from God after that happened? Because I think it's so beautiful for you to talk about how pain is governing people's choices. How does that relate to the way you relate to God when you're in pain?
So, the first thing I want to say is that right after he was excommunicated, we came home from the council. I went to pick up the kids, and my parents kind of knew it was a rough thing going on. I tried to be as open as possible at that point because I needed support. We needed support. And I went home, and I was worried at what I would find because I didn't know if he was going to be, depressed, laid out on the bed, or just like weeping, or like I didn't know where he was going to be. And he opened the door, and he was like, "Hey, guess what? It's going to be okay." And he told me that he came home and he prepared himself to feel the pains of hell that he had literally been told in the council he should be feeling right now. And he said, I sat there like, I'm ready. Here comes my punishment. And he didn't get that. He got, I'm right here. You're good. And again, that wasn't supposed to be true. That's not supposed to be possible, right?
The vilest of sinners shouldn't be able to feel exquisite joy.
See how that works?
Even though,
see how that's interesting?
Right, which is a cultural expectation, because Alma says that he felt exquisite joy even though he was the vilest of sinners, in his own words. Yeah.
And so, again, we had this challenge of the way that I thought things worked, which is you make a mistake and, you've offended the Spirit, it's gone, this idea. And I actually have a friend recently who said, the Spirit never goes away. You either have elf ears that can hear a snowflake fall in the forest, or you've got your fingers in your ears and you're singing at the top of your lungs. Yeah. But it doesn't go away. It's your ability to hear it, yeah. So that was a big shift. And then not long after that, there was a big, another relapse, and it was really tough, and started the beginning of a 10-month-long separation. We were separated for 10 months. And again, I kept feeling like, and even being told, just leave. Like, why are you still here? Why are you still doing this? And I said, because I'm not supposed to leave. And I was trying to just take it one step at a time. And I wanted the answer to be just walk away. It would have been so much easier in so many ways, but it wasn't the answer. And so I wasn't going to do it. And I loved him. And so if the answer from God wasn't walk away, I wasn't going to walk away. But then here I want to make sure that I point out that I had to keep myself physically, emotionally, spiritually safe in the separation. We couldn't be living in the same home with the level of betrayal that we were working with.
Right.
And again, I just have to emphasize that my choices were the right ones for me, because they were what I was getting through alignment with God, myself.
And they might not be someone else's choices in a situation that looked very similar.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's important to emphasize.
And I wanted that to be the case. I wanted there to be someone I could talk to who had lived it already and could tell me how it ended and what I needed to do.
Tell me
because I like the list.
What the happy
I like the equation.
Like. Yeah.
And I thought, oh, here's this example that's kind of close to ours. If I do what they did, and I liked the outcome. If I do what they did, it'll work. And during that 10-month-long separation, I did a lot of self-discovery, because I can trace it sort of back to Mother's Day that year, where I was like, here I am, separated from my husband.
And it's Mother's
I have
Day.
my kids half of the week, and the other half there with him. And what am I doing?
And it didn't look how you would have expected it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
With my expectations and how I thought life would go, I was failing. But I was learning enough about myself to realize that couldn't be the case. Because I knew that God loved me and that I had value and worth. And so I had to have worth with or without a husband, with or without my children, with or without
worth,
with or without any of these circumstances that I was working with. I had to have value. And so I decided to put the effort in to figure out who I was, because I wasn't sure, because I married at 21 and had kids right away, and I hadn't spent a lot of that time. I defined myself by my relationships, and happily so. I wanted to be married, I wanted children. But I hadn't put that effort into who am I standing by myself, and where does my worth sit in that space?
Yeah.
Because I learned I couldn't give that to any other person, because I had no control over any other person. All I can affect, all I can mindfully change is my own behavior, my own thought processes. And so I started doing things like I took a birth doula training, and I started telling people I was a veil worker, just a different veil, because
with childbirth
on the way in instead of on the way out. But it was a very sacred space, and it taught me about divine womanhood in a way that I don't know that you can really get any other way than standing with multiple women as they bring life into this mortal experience.
And so for you, in your experience, being with other women and discovering your value as a woman helped you get through this. And I think it's also important to emphasize that processes like this are just usually continual.
Always.
And that the self-discovery hasn't ended.
Mm-mm.
What would you say, acknowledging, of course, that you are still in process, what would you say your main message would be to someone else who's going to something similar, where you're, like we talk about with Oliver Wendell Holmes, you're on another side of complexity, and maybe it's not all simplicity all the time, but what would you say to someone who's in the middle of it?
Well, first of all, I think that I think that I'm at simplicity, but it's what simplicity looks like for me.
Yeah.
And for me, it comes down to love.
Mm-hmm.
On this hang all the law and the prophets, right? Like if I can't trace it back to love and Jesus, that's the catchphrase in our home. If we can't take it back to love and Jesus, then what are we doing?
Yeah.
So that's my extreme simplicity on this side.
Right.
But also just learning that every person's journey is different. And I'm grateful to my husband. He from the very beginning said, I would say someone has come to me because they know that we've struggled and they need someone to talk to. How much can I share? And he always said, if it can help someone, go for it, which I've always appreciated. But it meant that I heard a lot of stories. I became this astounding board for a lot of different people. And I realized no one on this earth has ever lived anyone else's story. We have no idea the complexities that lie behind the choices that people make and the paths that they take. Yeah. And I would sit with them, and that was what I tried to impress the most was, this is your story. No one else has ever lived it. If it's the right choice for you, it's the right choice. And that's the end of the conversation. And making a new choice and shifting in what you need tomorrow doesn't mean you made the wrong choice today. Yeah. Because you have new information, you have new experiences. So make each choice as it comes. And then the big one is you don't have to know the end from the beginning. You don't have to know how it's going to turn out in order to walk on the path. One step enough. And we're really all just taking one step at a time, and we're in such different places in our journeys, and you can't judge where one person is against another. And I try to apply it back to myself as well. I can't judge my journey with my faith against any rubric, any other person's list, or anything else. My priority is alignment with God. Yeah. And if I'm in alignment, then I don't worry about anything else. If I'm out of alignment, that means I have to take steps to get back in alignment, and I can't deceive myself and say, well, it's because I know better. No, if I'm in alignment, I don't need to worry. Yeah. And if I'm not, I got to figure out why.
Yeah, and what a shift from when you were a child, when all of your value was based on external praise, and now you're having to figure it out for yourself, which is, I think, what God wants for us. And I appreciate you centering so much of what you talked about on love. You very clearly are a very loyal person, not just to your husband and to your kids, but to God. And I think that works together, and I appreciate you so much sharing that, you sharing that story. It's valuable and sweet. Thank you.
Happy to.